good evening, community. Over the next few minutes, we will bring you stories of encounters with the paranormal, stories that many might consider madness, impossible events, until they experience them themselves. We invite you to listen to them purely for entertainment if you prefer. But remember, there are many things out there, far beyond what we as humans can comprehend, and perhaps sooner than you expect, you will experience something that will make you see beyond the normal, beyond the known. Perhaps soon, right where you are now listening, you will live your own story of the night. Let's begin with today's episode. When I was 17 years old, my father fell ill with cancer. The prognosis was very bleak, but he decided to undergo every procedure that would allow him to fight until the last moment. Cancer treatment itself can be incredibly harsh on a person, but also affects everyone around them. My mother dedicated herself to supporting him and praying like never before, every day without fail, morning and night, as she had been taught as a child. After 2 years of treatment that changed our lives completely, and also 2 years of unwavering faith and dedication to God from my mother, my father, against all odds, survived. My mother believed that God had placed him in the hands of the best doctors to save him, that he had helped make each chemotherapy session as effective as possible. She believed she had a very strong influence on my father's recovery. So, she decided to devote all her free time from then on to supporting the church in our neighborhood, especially helping those in need, those desperate, hopeless people who needed to hear her experience, her message of faith. Before that, my parents, although raised Catholic, had become completely atheistic and skeptical of everything, and that's how they taught my older sister and me to be. We didn't believe in anything, let alone that it was God who had saved my father. It seemed like a disrespect to the doctors and to science, and we couldn't help but mock my mother a little for her change. However, as we always do in this family, we decided to support her. I went to pick her up from church whenever I could, especially because it was on a very lonely and dark street. Like the rest of the neighborhood, that street was increasingly filled with more abandoned houses than inhabited ones. I remember this because I write about it. One Saturday, I went to pick up my mom when they had just had the first communion ceremonies. By the time I arrived, there were only a few people left taking pictures in front of the church. Inside, it was already empty, and they were beginning to turn off the lights. It was night. I entered and sat in the last pew, waiting as usual. The priest told me that my mother was in the small office with the other volunteer next to the church, that she wouldn't be long, and then asked me to remove my cap. Reluctantly, I complied. Someone spoke to the priest outside, apparently to take a photo, and he went out, closing the church doors behind him. So I was left alone inside, with only a couple of candles still lit at the altar, the only things illuminating that church, and I realized how eerie it could become. I thought about all the people who came there every day to pray, to beg for help. Let's put it that way. I thought about so many people coming, convinced of the existence of the supernatural. I was thinking about this when I realized I was not alone. Up at the front, in the first row, something suddenly rose with a white veil, as if it had been lying down and sat up. From what little I could see sticking out from the pew, I thought it was a child. I stood up to move closer and see if there was anyone else there to tell them how to get out, since we couldn't open the door the priest had closed. As I took a few steps forward, I could see that it was indeed a child, one of those making their first communion. She was still sitting there in her dress, as if waiting for someone. Perhaps she had no family and was just waiting for the priest. Perhaps her parents hadn't been able to come. Her dress had long sleeves. It was nice but very, very old, like from another time. It was a bit too big for her. Moreover, it wasn't unusual for poor children to be dressed in someone else's clothes. I heard what sounded like singing, like praying while singing. It made me a little sad to think she was alone, so I cleared my throat and spoke up to let her know I was there, to avoid scaring her. "Hello, the priest will be back soon." He just closed the door. "They're not expecting you outside." When I said this, she suddenly turned toward me. Her eyes barely cleared the pew, but I couldn't see them because of the veil she wore. She stood up and walked toward the door on her left, the one leading to the offices. Her movement was very strange. The dress dragged behind her, so I couldn't see how her feet moved. She walked without shifting any part of her body, as if she were stiff, just moving forward. I shouted that the exit wasn't that way, that she couldn't go in there. I got up to walk behind her and noticed the echo my steps made in the church. As I walked quickly, I realized I hadn't heard her footsteps. I followed her down the long corridor beside the church. On one side, it led to the small office, and on the other, to an exit at the back of the church. To my left, I saw the light on in the office. My mom was inside, but the child headed toward the other direction, toward the door. I followed at a distance to make sure she was okay, that someone wasn't waiting for her behind the church. There was nothing behind the church but an empty lot the size of several blocks, very dark. But I had seen that people sometimes parked their cars back there. The child left the door open, so I walked over there. On the other side, there was only darkness, not a single light. When I reached the door, I saw her about 15 meters away. She was barely visible in the darkness of that night. Suddenly, the white dress fell to the ground. What continued walking was a woman with completely wrinkled skin, so wrinkled she didn't even look like an old woman. It was something I had never seen before. She walked dragging her feet, and the dress lay on the ground as she advanced into the darkness. Although people may mock me now, at that moment, I thought she was an old woman who might need help and was disoriented. I had seen something like that with a grandfather's sister, so I tried to follow her to help. I passed by the dress and tried to find her, but as I moved away from the church, the darkness of the night prevented me from seeing anything, not even where I was placing my feet. I took out my phone, but it only illuminated the dampness of the night, forming a slight mist around me. The light only helped when I pointed it at the ground, but there was nothing. I decided to return to notify the priest and my mom. But WT, and I passed by the dress, it was no longer there. That white spot on the ground was now a sort of cement bag, half on the ground, half buried. I ran back, confused, down the hallway and heard voices. The priest was leaning against the office door, joking with my mom and the other volunteer. I hurried over and told them what I had just seen. My mom's and the other woman's faces changed completely, but the priest simply scolded me, telling me not to talk about such things, even as a joke, and left through the same door he had used to go outside. The other woman was pale, saying nothing. My mom just told me to hurry and gather her things. We three left and started walking. The woman could have crossed the first street to get home quickly, but she chose to walk with us, even though it took almost twice as long. She seemed very nervous, talking about a topic she and my mom knew well, but that I didn't fully understand. It turned out they were talking about what I had seen, a girl who appeared. Ed walking around the church during First Communion ceremonies. I understood they knew its origin, at least the story or legend, because such things aren't known for sure. I didn't say anything else, didn't ask any questions. The woman said goodbye when we arrived home. The only time I tried to ask my mom about what I had seen, she told me not to discuss it if I didn't believe in such things and to find a logical explanation. When I talked about it, my sister mocked me a lot for believing in ghosts. Since then, every time there's a First Communion and I have to pick up my mom from the church, believe me, I've never done it again.